koutou, e te rangatira o Hauraki, e te rangatira o Marituahu, a tēnā koutou, a tēnā koutou, a tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Pare Watana e taku tūpuna, a tēnā koe, a tēnā koe, tēnā. Pita, te rangatira, a te mokopuna o te harani wātana nei, a tēnā koe, a tēnā koe. Ko te rangatira, raurangatira mā, ko tēnā koutou, a tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. To all of you here present, I bring my greetings from all of you who are chiefs and leaders in your own right. We bring our greetings to you. And I greeted my tūpuna from Ngāti Pāwa, Ngāti Manu, Ngāti Tawakarara, and Ngāti Whanonga, who are all allied and all connected with us from this part of the world, which is the Coromandel Peninsula, and from Hauraki iwi. We're going to talk a bit about, our talk is about our ancestor. We divided it into two parts. And we're just going to take you on a series of connections and stories from her and her sister. And we're going to cover the United States President, direct connections, filmmakers, crime video people, educationalists, and people who are educated in different parts of the world. So that's part of what we'll talk about. I want to start to say how we're related. So, Pare Watana was born in 1858, and she died just a year before 1900, 1899. She was 41 years old, quite young. She didn't marry, and she didn't have any children. So her older sister, who was older than her by just 2 years, had 6 children. One of her children was, I always knew him as Uncle Taz, and Taz, or Tamihana, was Peter's grandfather. And my grandmother, that's Taz's sister, was Auntie Pauline, my grandmother, Pare, same name as this, but the niece of Pare was my grandmother. So my grandmother and Peter's grandfather are brother and sister. And we're the great-grand-nephews of Pare Watana. So that's our connection. So she lived up in an area, well, before I come to where she lived. She's of the hapu of Ngāti Nono. The whānau name is Watana. The hapu name is Nono. And the iwi or tribal name is Ngāti Maru, which you'll see is the second name on the wall here. So she was part and parcel of the rangatira class, if you like, of Ngāti Maru and of the Hauraki board of Hauraki iwi. She lived at a place near Thames. It's part of Thames today, and it's called Pare. And today Pare is a race course. I will just show you where that is, and I've got a photo of, I'll make it you. So the top black and white photo is about 1875, and that's looking from Thames across to south to Totra. And then this one is taken from my house, and that's my view, and this is looking across back the other way. So from two different perspectives. The older photo is taken from here, looking this way, this one looking back the other way. So it's a race course and it's covered on the river. So that's where she grew up. And she grew up with her sister at Pare. She's buried in the Nuru Park behind the Thames race course. And I can see that from where I live today. It's just
across the river. And my grandmother, she's buried on the left-hand side of me, and the Thames Kotra Cemetery at one side. So I've got my tupuna all around me, and this is where I live in Thames. Peter's father lives in Palmerston. So one of her good friends, one of Pare's good friends, was this lady here. And Tini Harani, who, those of you who have seen the exhibition, there's massive different images of her on the other side of the exhibition. And those two were very good friends. They used to hang out together. They grew up together. They grew up in Paraguay, and they also grew up in Anaya near Coromandel. And so the whakapapa stories that the descendants, which is Renata, have with her, connect their family with our family. And the two were very good friends. In the time that Pare grew up was a real significant time for the development of Thames. In that sort of 40 odd years from the 1860s, when it was the 1900s, there was a complete change of circumstances for most Māori, for most Ngāti Maru. Went from being predominantly the landowners to essentially being paupers in our own land. Because of the impact of colonisation, because of the discovery of gold and silver in Thames in the 1860s, the late 1860s, Thames suddenly grew from being just a very small town to a town overnight of 12,000, which was bigger than Auckland at that time. So there's this massive influx of people looking for a gold mine, for gold and so on, and gold was discovered in great quantities. The social impact of that meant that there was the introduction of a range of European diseases to which Māori had no immunity. And both Pare dying at 41 and her sister, our great-grandmother, dying at 42 because of just simply a lack of immunity to common illnesses. Yeah, our great-grandmother's husband, Alexander Hogg from Scotland, from Montrose in Scotland, he outlived his sister and his wife. And I've got a photo of both Pare's mother and her father. This is Alexander Hogg, and this is her mother. So this is this lady's mother. And then you can see in this photo Pare, and then one of the daughters of Te Arani, so it's their child, is my grandmother here. So I think one of the things that when we looked at these paintings, and people have often asked us, what do you think of the paintings and the artists and that sort of thing? And as you see, a magnificent artist, a very prolific artist, a great technician and a great artist, and recording, of course, Māori at the time, a certain group of Māori. From the photographs, the Foy brothers' photographs. And the Foy brothers, of course, came to Thames. And the photo here of the Foy brothers' shop in Thames was some of the very earliest and first photography in New Zealand at the time in the 1860s. So that's what we think of the painting. And to me, it's a great painting and it's a great image. Within the family, it's very proud to be able to come here and to connect. And for our children, like I've got two sisters-in-laws here in the audience today, they're friends, and my brother and his children have come. So it's a great opportunity that we can connect and we can share those stories with yourselves. But you know, what was happening at the time in that 40-year period of your life is just an annihilation of a group of people. It's an annihilation virtually of Ngāti Maru. And a dispossession when the land was taken through different ways. In some cases it was sold. And in our particular family case, a lot of land, a reasonable amount of land, because it was of whakapapa in the sense to the chiefs. We had a reasonable level of land compared to rank and file, if you like. It was held in trust for the iwi, but some of the land was sold on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. And all too often in New Zealand we hear, oh, Māori land is always taken, it was always naughty, it shouldn't have been done. For those of you who are living in New Zealand for the last 50 years, 30 years. But in our case, you've got to be careful. You've got to pick through those records quite carefully, because some of the land is willing buyer, willing seller. And others of it remains today in our land, in our own land ownership. And Peter and I think what we share about 13 blocks of land that we both whakapapa into and we're both owners of. And some of our land holdings were taken. That's quite true. But the ones that were sold on a willing buyer, willing seller, the land was sold to do and to provide educational opportunities for this lady's nieces and nephews. And Peter's going to talk about that and how that leads to quite a different perspective and a different series of lectures than what people may have heard if you're just thinking all Māori land gets taken by all the colonial settlement. A chunk of it does. And so what I'd say is this, is that while this is a great painting, it's a romanticised notion of Māori, painted by a colonial individual coming to New Zealand and looking at Māori as the noble savage, if you like, fantastic paintings in themselves. The backstory to this is not a happy story. It's a story of dispossession, of people dying of diseases of poverty, and of land being taken, and the alienation of land and so on. So that's why we have things like the restorative justice discussions today through treaty of Waitangi and so on. So that's the backstory that you never see when you look at a painting like this. But that's the story we share with her dying at 41 and her sister at 42. And the descendants, the nieces and nephews, they actually, curiously enough, a lot of them, a couple, one died 2 years old, others lived to a very ripe old age, to the 80s. So that just brings me on to the painting itself. So this is the old image I've had for 20 or 30 years at home, so it's a bit, doesn't look as flash as this. So I'll put that down and we take the photograph and you look at the photograph and they're quite different features. You look at the huia feathers, the position of the huia feathers are different to how he painted here. The korowai itself, you'll see that the korowai is quite straight across the top part of the chest, whereas it's an angular one in the painting. This chap just moved the position of the tiki is shown as an elongated tiki, where the tiki that she's wearing is on its side. And also for those who are sort of forensic artists and curators, it's not the same tiki at all. It's a different tiki, it's what's been painted with, than what is shown here. And I'll come back to that in a minute, and probably one of the other sort of little bits and pieces is you probably can't see, but she's wearing a ring. She's wearing a ring on the finger there. There's no ring in the painting at all. And that ring was handed down within our family. The korowai is handed down within our family, and I have the guardianship of the korowai. I've had an infection in my arm side. I wasn't able to bring that korowai today, but I was actually wanting to bring it up and have it here so you can see that, particularly given this is the last day. We opened the exhibition so many months ago and I wanted to try and get it, but just unfortunately I haven't been able to. The story goes, one of my uncles, I don't know if she's got behind me, here somewhere. Maybe I'll just tell you this one last story before I hand over to Peter. My grandmother's brother for many years worked and lived United States, in San Francisco. And he had one daughter, Mary Ellen Doll, and I went to see her in San Francisco many years ago, and she said, oh, I was talking about Pare's sister, Tarani. And she said, oh, she said, say that name again, and I said Tarani. She said, oh, she said, my grandfather, I always thought he used to say Aorani, which is an Americanised version, I guess, of Tarani. And she said that was his favourite name for me. It was always Aorani. And she told me that he'd given her a ticket, and she'd always had that ticket from a child and had it in her purse. She was in a restaurant in San Francisco, and she'd gone to do makeup in the restaurant, in the powder room. And she put her bag down, and it was open, and she came back, and the ticket had been taken from her bag. And so I always, until actually this exhibition started, and one of the curators was talking about Lindauer's use of appropriated images and things, I thought it was this one. But actually, you know, it's that one. So, because in our story it was always the tiki, and it wasn't like necessarily going to say which particular one or anything. So yeah, it's gone, and it was taken, and as I've said at different times before, at some point it'll come back. And it will probably just sort of find its way back home. So I think that's probably, I might just leave it there and leave my part of the talk here and hand over to Peter. He can pick up really these connections of education and other things which come as a result of selling of some land so that the next generation, their nieces and nephews, can have a better life and can move in a different world, can move in a European and cosmopolitan world, and a world beyond the early clashes of a colonisation and a culture coming and a culture butting up against each other. To move beyond that, so I hand over to you.
Is this working?